And so what we'll do is, as we continue, I'm just going to present just a few classes here, just different starting points. And we'll take it from there, and I will hopefully do a masterful job of leading the discussion. There you go. See if I can do that, right? Hey, Ray, would you like to lead us in a prayer tonight?
Yeah.
We'll get going here. Thank you.
Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for allowing us to be here tonight and study your word and keeping the weather. Father, I pray that you help us to understand what you want us to know and apply it to our lives and become closer to you and grow in your love and knowing who you are. It's in Jesus' name I pray.
Amen. What is represented by the word. Confounded and befuddled. Admitting that our finite minds, no matter how desperately we reach for it, we just can never get to the bottom of. Just a second, I can't talk and do.
Could you turn on your wireless mic? We're using the 21
Okay. So we were talking about God in his eternity and those kinds of things. So I liked the discussion, as I was saying, because we were just reaching and realizing or experiencing our finiteness when we start talking about God. But at the same time, as we saw, we also are expected to know God in certain ways, and our relationship to God, and in fact our very salvation, depends on that. This is eternal life, Jesus said, that they know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom you have sent. And so there's a sense in which we absolutely must know God. And when we talk about, let's just think about the New Testament, in particular passages that we find in 1 John, when he says, the one who says, I have come to know him, what does he attach that with? What does he attach that to? The one who says that I have come to know him and does not do what? Well, that's true, but how did John put it? Keep his commandments. So if I say I know God, but I don't keep his commandments, then I'm a liar. I'm not being, it isn't true. So there is a walking with, there is an obedience to, there is a serving, acknowledging, all of those things that we talk about of God that goes into knowing him in that sense. But when it comes to the depths of God, Paul says the Spirit searches all things, even the depths of God. Okay? And so for a finite human being, now what Paul's saying in that context, he's talking about things that God has revealed to us. These things He uses that word things several times in that passage, that God has made known to us through the Spirit, for the Spirit searches all things. So whatever God wants us to know, the Spirit has brought to light and reveals to us. All right, so tonight I want to talk about, or make our starting point, the God who knows us, the God who knows us. Okay, and so having established that we can't, in a certain sense, know God, and we understand the difference between the senses, that the sense in which we can't know Him and the sense in which we must know Him. We see the difference there. God, on the other hand, knows everything. Okay. And I want to start out in Isaiah 40 tonight as we get our minds focused here. And because Isaiah 40, if you're familiar with it, it is a chapter that has a very specific place in the remote context of Isaiah, but we're not going to get into that tonight. But it is a chapter that teaches us a great deal about the God that we serve, in this aspect of God that knows. All right, so there's a couple of questions that are implied in this chapter of Isaiah 40. One of those questions is, has God... now we have to go back to the context here of Isaiah, and he's looking at things that are going to come. Babylon is going to take Israel or Judah into captivity. And so in light of that, there's two questions that Isaiah wants to make sure that people have the answers to. One of them, has God cast off his people? Right? And so when this captivity occurs, it's going to be natural for Jewish people who are going into that captivity to wonder, are we done? Has God cast us off? He's done with us. He's tossing us away. So he wants to answer that question. And then the second question, is he able to deliver them? Okay, is he able to deliver them? Now, these two questions are just pregnant, if I may use that term, there's so much depth to them. There's so much that is involved in these questions, implications for you and I as believers in and followers of this God, right? So let's take a look at some of the things here in this chapter. Now, he starts out, comfort, oh comfort my people. And in fact, since I'm right here, not too far away, and I can do this not too clumsily, in chapter 12, he says, then you will say on that day, the day that Isaiah is going to be pointing to in chapter 40, you will say, I will give thanks to you, O Lord, for although you were angry with me, your anger is turned away and you comfort me. So the people are, of course, in a spiritual state that's going to lead to captivity. But God, even in light of that, speaks these words of comfort to them. Okay? And so when we think about ourselves, if we want to make parallels to ourselves, because there are many, if there's a captivity in the future, I deserve to go into it. Okay? But even so, even though I have transgressed God's law, still he's speaking words of comfort to me and to you today, is he not? In spite of, okay, so this is all about the grace of God Speak kindly to Jerusalem and call out to her that her warfare has ended. Now he's looking in the future. Okay? Babylon has yet to take them into captivity. So this is the prophetic perfect. Remember what that is? The prophetic perfect. Okay? Perfect means complete. So he speaks about things yet future as if they're already complete. Really important to remember that when you're reading the prophets, especially Isaiah. That her iniquity has been removed, that she has received of the Lord's hand double for all her sins. In other words, he's going to chastise them completely. Okay? And then in verse 3, he says, a voice is calling, clear the way for the Lord in the wilderness, make smooth in the desert a highway for our God. Every valley will be lifted up, and every mountain and hill be made low, and let the rough ground become a plain, and the rugged terrain a broad valley. Okay? And so what is this pointing to in the future? Everybody knows. What is he? Where do we? Pardon? Yeah. So there's John the Baptist is going to come, and we will see the glory of the Lord will be revealed. We beheld his glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. So that glory of God is coming, and all flesh will see it together. For the mouth of the Lord has spoken. A voice calls, call out. Then he answered, what shall I call out? All flesh is grass, and all its loveliness is like the flower of the field. The grass withers, the flower fades, when the breath of the Lord blows upon it. Surely the people are grass. Judah is like grass. Okay? The flesh of Judah is like the grass that withers away. And so it is with Babylon. The flesh of man, mankind in the face of God is just like that grass that dries up and blows away. Okay? The grass withers, the flower fades, but the word of our God stands forever. Okay? All right. So one of the things as we speak about his knowledge. In verse 12, who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand? So the picture here, God has all the oceans of the world in the hollow of his hand. Okay? And marked off the heavens by the span, and calculated the dust of the earth by the measure, and weighed the mountains in a balance, and the hills in a pair of scales. And then he says, who has directed the Spirit of the Lord, or as his counselor has informed him? It's interesting that in these pantheistic, idolatrous systems, belief systems that the nations had, there would be a God who gave counsel to the other gods, who would be an advisor to the other gods. And so Isaiah is alluding to this in this statement when he says this, who has directed the Spirit of the Lord? Okay. Who has become his counselor? Okay. With whom did he consult, and who gave him understanding? Okay. So he's going to be contrasting the living God, the true God, with these idol gods quite a bit all over Isaiah. With whom did he consult, and who gave him understanding, and who taught him in the path of justice, and taught him knowledge, and informed him of the way of understanding? So if you're what do these words remind you of a place in the New Testament that looks back to these? These words echo to you from the New Testament? Okay. Remember in Romans 11, when Paul finishes the chapter, oh, the depth of the riches, both of the wisdom and knowledge of God, how unsearchable are his ways, etc. And then he quotes here from Isaiah, who has directed the Spirit of the Lord, or as his counselor has informed him. Okay, all right. And so the point here is this all-knowing, all-powerful God that we worship. Now, let me ask you this. As you live your life every day, and as we live our lives wanting to serve God in this world, of what value, put my slide from last week up there, of what value, what is the value? I'm not asking if there's any, but what is the value of being thoughtful about the nature of the God that created this universe and created us? What is the value as we live every day of being aware of that knowledge or of thinking about these things? Steve?
I have asked myself the question, what is it about, what was it that made Jesus different than all other men? We're told he stepped apart from his, relationship, that's probably the wrong word. We stepped apart from the place that he had with God and took a place as we've taken it.
Yes.
So then I asked myself the question, so what is it that allowed him, since he couldn't just do it miraculously, live sinlessly, that he had to experience what we were going through, that he had to live the life we're living? What was unique about him different from me? And this is only a part of it, I'm sure, but it seems to me that Jesus had, this is the term that I use for myself, a sense of the presence of God all the time. That God was actively, intimately, I'll say it the other way, that he was actively, intimately connected with his Father at all times, so that when temptation did come his way, he was instantly confronted with a choice. Am I going to do things my Father's way or not his Father's way? That he had a sense of the presence of God with him all the time. And it certainly is true for me that when I get myself in a jam, how am I doing on really owning the reality that God is all knowledgeable, knows all about me, knows everything, that he's got me, and he's watching me falter, because I've lost my connection with him. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah. I know a preacher right now, one who contacted me here in the last couple weeks, just to get my take on something that he's dealing with. But this preacher he's being let go because he will not back off of his teaching that Jesus set aside his deity, and that if he was perfect because of being God, how do we relate to him? How do we relate to Jesus? My flesh immediately says, hey, good for you. I'm glad that you could come and you could show us what it means to be perfect. Thanks a lot. That's my flesh. Immediately goes there, because you can't relate to me But the Bible teaches the opposite of that, does it not? He had to become like his brethren in all things in order to be a faithful and merciful high priest in things pertaining to God. He had to be made like us in all things. So this preacher he's on his way out because he's not backing off of that, and the people that he's preaching to don't believe it. Okay. Now I say because I could have used this example on Sunday. So but the reason I say that is because okay, Daryl, don't do it. Don't do it. Don't no. Don't do it. Okay. I'll remind you of that case on Sunday. But what you're saying, Steve, there, I wholeheartedly believe that Jesus was the most self-controlled man who ever walked the face of the earth. Okay? And he showed that it can be done. And so I can see why it's so easy to say, well, we're told, well, if you say you have no sin, you're lying, the truth is not in you. But Jesus had no sin, and he was like us in every way. Okay? And so we had a man there who was connected to God. He said, I always do the things that are pleasing to him. And always is an absolute. Okay, can I say that? I can't say that. Now, if I start preaching that, then you should fire me. Okay, because I'll be lying to you. So it's a very nuanced discussion for sure. Yeah, Chris.
It's an interesting thing because, last week I wasn't here, but you talked about how big God was, right?
Yeah.
There's this sort of a Horton hears a who kind of a thing, right? Where there's this whole world that that's what he says in Isaiah 40. It's small. Here's how big the universe is.
Mm-hmm.
I just my hands.
Yeah.
Here's, by the way, I'm going to weigh the waters and little drop here,
Yeah.
right?
Drop in the bucket.
I'm that big.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to send my glory is going to be revealed to you.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to come. That's talking about Jesus, right? There's the glory revealed.
Mm-hmm.
The Bible's very clear that I'm both God and man.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that I can't get my arms around what that means in every nuance means absolutely nothing.
Right.
He said he was both, so he was both. Well, he had to set it aside. Okay, then in some way he did.
Yeah.
I don't have to know how he did it to know he did it.
Right.
Right? Nor do I have to say, well, he couldn't have been God. We said he was. Then he couldn't have been man. But he said he was. The word is the word.
Yeah.
Be okay with that. So I think
Yeah.
that this whole story, I think this is a good study because that's how big God is.
Mm-hmm.
God can know billions of people and every thought that's there and be intimate with every one of us
Mm-hmm.
if we'll only let him.
Yeah. Very good. Very good. Yes, Arlene.
Well, I have had a lot of years, and I've been through a tremendous amount.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the most important things I've had to learn, because I've been alone.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're alone, you're not alone.
Right.
If you believe and trust God, He is there. But there's something in us that cringes maybe, and we can't quite. But when we finally get to the end of ourselves, and I mean the end,
Mm-hmm.
with all of this and all of this, by yourself, that is when God, you realize that He's holding His hand out there to you,
Mm-hmm.
pulls you in, and loves you, because there's nobody else. And you feel it,
Yeah.
and you know it, and it changes your whole perspective and your whole life, because he's now living here.
Yeah. There's a saying that says, when God is all we have, then we know that he's enough. When he's all we have, then we know that he's enough. So that's why, when we think about hardship, trials, bringing us closer to God, that would be how that works. And God did this with people. We talked about Micah 6 in a lesson recently, and he gave, he took away the food, he took away the rain, he caused mildew and mold and everything to try to get them to humble themselves and return to him. But they wouldn't. They just stubbornly refused to go back to him. But had they not been so obstinate, his design would have worked as it does with others, is that when we realize that we're totally dependent on him, then he's enough, right? But yeah, we do have to get over ourselves. And I don't know if you're able to hear that very well over there in the north end, but that's what Arlene was talking about there. Yeah, Chris?
I mean, this whole thought of God knows you, and so I don't think there's any way I can be completely, I guess I can be, Jesus was, but there's an ebb and flow with that because God is always on. He's always there. He's always with you. But even with David, right? When David's going through this stuff with Bathsheba and Uriah the Hittite, right? He was still going through the motions. I don't imagine he said, "Oh, I'm done with the God thing," right? He didn't do that. But what he was doing was he had to be compartmentalizing God.
Oh, sure.
Some way,
Oh, yeah.
somehow.
Yeah.
And God is patient enough to see us through that because he saw David through that. And so but our awareness is, let's not compartmentalize God, right? If he's front and center, and that's why the study and the word and talking about all these things are so important, because if he's front and center in front of me, when he was in front of David, what did David do? Oh boy, right? It was made clear. So we've got to, but that's God knowing us. We've got to be cognizant of that all the time and embrace that, because if we don't, we're going to compartmentalize, and that's when we get into trouble like David did. I think.
Yeah, I mean, would you guys agree that given, if you have, you take a person who is taking this thing seriously, okay? They're taking it seriously, and whatever that means. Would you agree that over time, given, over time for a person, now people, come and go at different ages, different stages, but a person that is serious and faithful over decades, and you look at where they started and where they ended, would you agree that sin would become increasingly the exception in their life rather than, to whatever extent, the rule? When they've, in other words, would we become more and more deeply like our teacher over time, right? Because we will have, like Arlene was saying, we will have been, in those times where we don't get it and we're doing our thing, and but over time we're continuing to let go of our self, of our thoughts, of our self, right, and becoming more like him. Yeah, Chris?
Yeah, I just always remember this because the way he said this was, He goes, look, we're never going to be sinless, but hopefully at my age I sin less.
There you go, yeah.
And that's just a natural progression of that. Now, what does sin less mean for you? I think it depends on your age and your stage. I think that both things are variables there.
Yeah. So you can look at your life and hopefully, I have not infrequently times when I'll say to myself, I don't do that anymore. You know, the thought will come and I'll stop and go, I don't do that anymore. Okay. And so as we go through our life, that certainly ought to be, as we recognize, see, this is the thing about the value of thinking about God, the greatness of God and the grandeur of God and the glory of God and all those things, is that, you know, we always have, we're always reaching forward. We're always reaching for Him, okay? And we continue to progress. A.W. Tozer, in his The Knowledge of the Holy, says, because God knows all things perfectly, He knows no thing better than any other thing, but all things equally well. He never discovers anything. He is never surprised, never amazed. Now, when I read that, I thought of Jesus marveling at the Jews' unbelief. You know, he was amazed at that kind of a heart. It's right, you know, that here he is right in front of him and doing these things. But anyway, we get the point. He never wonders about anything, nor, except when drawing men out for their own good, does he seek information or ask questions. Well, who is a God like me? Well, that's a question, but he's not asking the question for us to give him some information, or give him some counsel, or to teach him something. Okay. So he does. Nor does he seek information or ask questions. And so, so we talk about, spend the rest of our class. Yeah, go ahead, Chris. Or Steve. Yeah.
Chris Jr.
Chris Jr., yeah.
So you brought up Isaiah, so off my little mind goes.
Oh, sure. Yeah, no problem.
But this place where this chapter of Isaiah opens up and talks about comfort, comfort to my people.
Yes.
That's a big theme in Isaiah.
Yes.
Because of the jam that they're in. And Isaiah's trying to tell them, your God will comfort you.
Yes.
Isaiah 53 has always stood out for me because in Isaiah 52, verse 9, it says, break forth together into singing, you waste places of Jerusalem, for the Lord has comforted his people.
Mm-hmm.
So this is that comfort theme that it seems to me runs all the way through the book of Isaiah, this picture that you're in a mess, but your God will bring you comfort. And then the point I wanted to make is one of the other big themes, I think, that runs clear through Isaiah is this big statement that Isaiah says, your God reigns. Mm-hmm. And you hear it over and over and over again in Isaiah, your God reigns. Mm-hmm. In this time of the word that Isaiah uses, this time of desolation, your God's going to comfort you, your God reigns. And I think to the extent that we are going to be comforted here is equal to the acceptance or the connection we have that our God reigns.
Yeah.
Those two things seem inseparable to me.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. It's a wonderful thought. That's very true. All right. So I want to look at Psalm 139, just the verse 6 verses right here. Psalm 139. He says, O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You understand my thought from afar. You scrutinize my path and my lying down, and are intimately acquainted with all my ways. Even before there is a word on my tongue, behold, O Lord, you know it all. You have enclosed me behind and before, and laid your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is too high, I cannot attain to it. Okay? So this is what we've been acknowledging in various ways here. And as we think about this God and his knowledge, so let's be reminded here of some things about that. So his knowledge is not like man's knowledge. Okay? Man's knowledge is limited. Mankind and his accumulated wisdom until the last day will be nothing compared to what God knows. It is just nothing. Okay? God's knowledge is not learned. Okay? Nobody taught him. And this is where we go, where our minds get like spinning, like the computer thing. We're waiting at that circle spinning there, and our minds kind of go there when we think about this God who always existed and has always known everything there is to know. It just makes me want to see him, makes me want to experience heaven more, right? He doesn't need any updates. Okay, it's complete. His knowledge is complete. His knowledge is certain, and doesn't need to be updated. Okay, and he knows who we are. If in Jeremiah, Jeremiah 16. And again, when we talk about knowing these things and believing these things as we live life, how will these things impact our life? Okay, so he knows who we are. So he says, behold, in Jeremiah 17:16, he says, I'm going to send for many fishermen, declares the Lord, and they will fish for them. And afterwards, I will send for many hunters, and they will hunt them from every mountain and every hill and from the clefts of the rocks. So here's his application. For my eyes are on all their ways. Okay? They are not hidden from my face, nor is their iniquity concealed from my eyes. Okay? And then he goes on, I will first doubly repay their iniquity and their sin, because they have polluted my land. They have filled my inheritance with the carcasses of their detestable idols and with their abominations. And so he says, I see everything they do. Now, if I'm really attuned to that, and we talk about Jesus being always in the presence of the Father, and always aware that whatever he's doing, whatever he's thinking, he's doing it right in front of God. Right in front of him. I have this in this section here. So I just love this passage in Malachi, and it's in chapter 3. Okay. And in verse 16, Malachi 3:16, it says, for those who feared the Lord spoke to one another. Okay. And the Lord gave attention and heard it. And a book of remembrance was written before him for those who fear the Lord, who esteem his name. They will be mine, says the Lord of hosts, on the day that I prepare my own possession, and I will spare them as a man spares his own son who serves him. So you will again distinguish between the righteous and the wicked, between one who serves God and one who does not serve him. And it's always impressed me that these people are talking and he's listening to them. So I mean, you don't have to answer this question, but how does this knowledge impact a person with respect to their conduct if we are constantly aware that he hears what we're saying and he sees what we're doing all the time? Because we're in this little window right now. It's probation, right? Just in this little window. And we come into this world, and for us, we, in our situation, we have the Word of God readily available to us, and he watches, what are we going to do with this? He's patient, he's loving, he's forgiving. He's made that possible by the cross. And are we dealing in good faith with him? See? Do we trust what he's promising us? And does that trust reflect itself in our life? And he's watching us all through life. And then when we're done, I always think of what Paul, I think it was Onesimus, I think, but I just always think about where Paul said, may he find mercy on that day. May he find mercy on that day. That's a big deal. That's a big deal. And so we need to think about God, his character, his nature, the reality. Like Gehazi, those hosts of the Lord are all around us, at least in this poetic way that I'm using it, that God is present. We don't see him in that sense, but he's there all the time. Yeah, Chris and then Steve.
In Hebrews, a lot of times we think of Hebrews 4:12, the Word of God is living and active, sharper than any two-edged sword. We quote that all the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Don't quote verse 13 too much. And no creature is hidden from his sight, but all are naked and exposed to the eyes of him to whom we must give an account. Mm-hmm. That is, the language there is just, you're exposed 100%. There's nothing. So you got two choices. You need to realize that, or you can ignore it to your own peril.
Yeah.
That's really, and I think it's easy with Satan on his side, with Satan there, to kind of, again, put it to the side. Or to say, yeah, but I'm just not going to think about that, right? If you think about it, if that's on your mind and on your heart, the way I operate and behave changes completely.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah.
Yeah, it has to.
If I want to do something wrong, I like that term compartmentalize in this context, because if I want to do something wrong, that's exactly what I have to do. I have to stick it in a box. Okay? Stick it in a box and then go do what I'm going to do. But if I can't simultaneously, you can't do it. See? But that's why this is valuable, to face these realities and understand that God knows. He knows us. Steve, did you have something?
Well, only this, that we're talking about Jesus and how he managed to do his job as a man, and we've talked around this idea that he had this wonderful connection with his Father, that he was never very far away from him, so far that any time sin approached, God wasn't closer to him than the sin was, and he could make the right choice every time because of his connection with his Father. So then if that's really true, then we ask ourselves the question, okay, how do I get that? how do I go about having that? One of the things that's really interesting to me about reading about Jesus' life in the New Testament and the Gospels is how much time he spent with his Father in prayer. He just prayed all the time. He would go out for hours and just, you know, and I gotta think that's a really key component to how did he have that connection with his Father, with God, let me say, as a man, how did he have that connection with God in a way that, boy, I failed miserably at that. Boy, the example Jesus left of the amount of time he spent in prayer to his Father
Yeah.
is a tip-off, I think.
Now, that is something that that fosters what I'm going to say right now. And that is everyone, all you and I, if we are normal functioning people, have been given the power to direct our attention wherever we choose. If I'm confronted with temptation, I have the power to recognize it and then to direct my attention away from it onto something that's going to stand in its place. We have the power to do that. I just wonder if, because of the nature of because of what sin has done in this world, okay, you know, and people who came into the world into situations that were you know godless parents, godless environment, okay, and I don't mean they have to be, you know, I just mean God's not there, a-religious, no thought about God, you know, or all kinds of things on the spectrum. You got alcoholic parents, you've got drug addict parents, you've got abusive parents, you know, or whatever it may be, but people come into this world and even when we become Christians, even though we know, okay, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. I have the ability to take him into account and direct my attention, but sometimes the thoughts and the feelings are so intense that we can't separate ourselves from them. Prayer is supplemental to that. Prayer, we are putting our complete attention off of ourself, off of our flesh, onto God. And when that is a practice, we start to live that way when we're not praying, right? We're able to, there's a space between our flesh and the things of this world and the things of God's world. So prayer is absolutely necessary for that, okay? To develop that way. So I've gone back and forth with Philippians 4:13, and I can do all things. You know, what does that mean? But that's where I'm at right now, is that if I have the knowledge of God, I have the ability, as Paul said in Philippians 23 and 24, I believe, where he said, whatever is true, right, honorable, you know, et cetera, good repute. He said, dwell on these things. I don't have to dwell on wrong things. If I dwell on wrong things, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do wrong things. That's right. See? And so if I make the choice to continue to be aware, watch over your heart with all diligence. Remember that passage? To be aware of what's going on up here and understand that I don't have to identify with everything that runs through my head. I can observe it and I can make a judgment as to whether or not it's worthwhile or not worthwhile. You know, and if it's a bird, it may land on my head, but I don't have to allow it to make a nest there. I can shoo it off and I can replace it with something better. We have the power to do that. And as we continue to exercise that power, we will be transformed increasingly throughout our life. And I think that's one thing Richard Tucker used to say. He used to talk about mountain climbers and you're climbing up the mountain and the guy, his heart gives out and they're burying him, and on his tombstone it says he died climbing. And so that's what we want. Sure, we can get to the point where we can't really climb anymore. We're just but while we're able to do that, just think about that, the power of awareness and choosing where to put your attention. Yes, Arlene?
That's another one of the things. It's the stages of your life.
Yeah.
Because you grow up, you have parents, and then they disappear.
Yeah.
They fade away, your brothers and sisters, and some of them pass away actually.
Yeah.
And you are more and more responsible for you.
That's right.
And so as you get closer to the Lord, He lets you see once in a while that you are on the same plane that He's on.
Mm-hmm.
When you realize that it's you.
Mm-hmm.
You are responsible for you.
Man. Yeah.
Hard.
Yeah. There's a proverb that says, "He who is wise for himself, and he who scoffs, he alone will bear it." And I think about how sometimes when a person becomes a Christian, I mean, we're gonna save the world, and then okay, and then it would work. And we're gonna save the country. Okay, and then we're gonna save the state. No, we're gonna save the county, and we're gonna save the city. And, I'm gonna save my family. The only person you can Acts 2:40, right? Acts 2:40, save yourselves from this perverse generation. Ultimately, we can influence, but when I die, it's going to be me and God. Not Daryl and Monique. It's going to be me. How did I live? Okay? And so we have to be, when we talk about, in marriage, people who aren't, they're not doing what God said to do, and because of the other person, and I can just hear God saying, "What did I tell you to do? Don't worry about them. What did I tell you to do?" So with time, and I can say this with some credibility, you do understand that you do what you can and try to be a light and be an influence for other people. But ultimately, everybody's got to bear their own load. They got to bear their own load. Okay. So God doesn't only, sometimes when we think about God seeing everything we do, don't we tend to have kind of a negative bias to that? And so, well, all the bad stuff, God sees the bad stuff we do. But He also sees good things, doesn't He? I mean, if He can say, "Well done," then He saw not only, envies and resentments and bitterness or whatever might manifest in our life, but He also sees the good things. Like, remember what Nehemiah's constant refrain was to God? Remember me, O Lord, for good, right? For the good that I've done to this people. Remember me for that. Okay? Because God saw the good, and He does see the good that we do. I can't think of a place where God says, thank you for, I really can't. Now, maybe you can. What he does say is, when you've done all things commanded of you, say, we are unworthy slaves. We've only done what we ought to have done. So, you know, he's the master. We're the disciples, you know. But he does appreciate, he does appreciate faith and service for sure. Yeah.
I mean, he doesn't thank us, but he can be pleased with us.
He can be
He was
pleased, yeah,
pleased
very
with
good.
Jesus,
Yeah.
and there's times when he'll be pleased with us. But yeah, there's not a gratitude, because that's not the relationship we sustain.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But he'll be pleased with us,
Yeah.
and that's more than enough.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I still remember this saying. Somebody said that God is easy to please, but hard to satisfy. You know, easy to please, but hard to satisfy. You know, he wants us to keep going. He knows our scars. You know, the losses that we experience, the hurts that we experience, the betrayals, the accusations. You know, Jesus talked about those who, persecute you and insult you and say all kinds of evil against you falsely on account of me. The scars that we sometimes have from our families of origin, or other things, but all of those things, God sees those too, and He understands those things, as a shepherd. Okay, and so, as we mentioned here, He knows our service. He knows the things. There's another quote here. It says, "God is the note-taking heavenly observer. He knows about the time you bit your tongue when you could have contributed to a rumor. He takes notice every time you greet a stranger or visit a person in the hospital or prison. Every secret act of character, conviction, and courage has been observed in living color by our omniscient God." Okay. So not only is there a motivation, well, God sees it. God sees everything you're doing. Well, okay. That's a motivation to do better. But also, He sees everything you're doing. That's good. And as we're saying, He's pleased with that. And isn't that a motivation to do good? See? So one way or the other, He's got us on both sides. He sees in fact, in Proverbs 15:3, that the eyes of the Lord go through the earth, seeing the evil and the good. He sees it all. Okay, so don't ever think that He's just up there with a club ready to knock you over the head and throw you away because you do wrong. He sees both. And we have Christ who takes care of, when we're honest with Him and with ourselves, that He takes care of the sin. And, Satan comes, and we've talked about in our Romans class, Satan comes and accuses us, and we just say, see Jesus. Go talk to Him, okay? Because we don't have to deal with it. He dealt with it. Okay? So we just are allowed to continue to grow, and then, and God knows, He knows our situation, okay? So that was my last one here, but it's not advancing for some reason. So again, everything that we go through in life, He knows all about it. Okay. He sees the big picture. Sometimes we get focused on that we get that myopia that Peter talked about, that short-sightedness, and we can only see what's right in front of us, and we suffer sometimes because of that. But He sees the big picture. Right? And so it's a great exercise for us to keep aware of those passages that point us to do the same thing. So yeah, lots of more we could talk about. I always over-prepare for these things, but that's okay. But good discussion. And, we're going to keep talking for a little bit about God from these various standpoints. And then we'll get on with some other things after that. So Any questions or comments before we close? Okay, very good. Class is dismissed.